Now gather round, folks, because I'm going to tell you a story about how a little white lie, the kind we tell just to get through a Tuesday, can turn into the biggest, most complicated mess you've ever seen. This is the story of Amelia Hayes and how she accidentally invented the perfect imaginary boyfriend right in front of the one person who absolutely should not have heard about him. Her boss, the CEO. Amelia was, by all accounts, a rising star at Vance Corp, a massive financial and tech consulting firm right in the heart of downtown Chicago. She was 27, sharp as a tack, and had a work ethic that could shame a team of oxen. She loved her job as a senior executive assistant, which was really just a fancy title for the person who keeps the entire regional division from collapsing. But there was a problem with working at Vance Corp, especially when you were young, single, and female. The corporate world, even in the modern age, sometimes felt less like a meritocracy and more like a high-stakes dating pool. And Amelia, frankly, was sick of swimming. Every week, it was the same drill. Mr. Thompson from Acquisitions would invite her to discuss Q4 projections over a very non-work-related glass of Chardonnay. Mr. Jenkins from Marketing would leave suggestive notes on her desk, complete with poorly drawn hearts. And then there was the general pressure from the older executives who thought a woman's success should be measured by the size of the diamond on her left hand. Amelia wasn't anti-romance, not at all. But she was pro-focus. She was working 60 hours a week, studying for her MBA at night, and her goal for the next 2 years was simple: get promoted to senior analyst, buy a condo, and maybe then consider dating someone who didn't smell faintly of desperation and expensive cologne. She needed a shield, a force field. She'd tried everything. "I'm too busy. I'm focusing on my career. I'm allergic to your cologne, sir." Nothing worked. They always saw it as a challenge, not a rejection. So Amelia started experimenting with the idea of the phantom boyfriend. It was a common tactic among women in high-pressure offices. He had to exist just enough to be real, but be busy enough never to be seen. At first, he was just someone. "Oh, I can't make the networking dinner. My someone is visiting from out of town." But the executives were too good at sniffing out weak excuses. They'd press, "What does he do? Where does he live?" Amelia realized her phantom needed substance. He needed a personality. He needed a demanding, high-status job that explained his chronic unavailability. And that's how Ethan Miller was born. Ethan, Amelia told her closest work confidant, Sarah, was an investment banker working in London. He was brilliant, totally devoted, but tragically tied up with global mergers and acquisitions, meaning he was always on a different continent or on a 12-hour flight. "He sounds perfect," Sarah had deadpanned, stirring her coffee. "He's rich, successful, and only exists on WhatsApp." "Exactly," Amelia sighed with relief. "He's the ultimate corporate deterrent." For 2 months, Ethan Miller worked like a charm. She could politely decline any after-hours invitation by saying, "Oh, Ethan and I are having a video call at 7 p.m. He just landed in Singapore." The men backed off. They understood high finance commitment. They respected the territorial claims of a rival alpha male, even an invisible one. Then came the annual Vance Corp gala. Now, this wasn't just a party. This was the event. Held in the grand ballroom of the Palmer House Hilton, it was where all the major deals were discussed, careers were made, and yes, where the most intense corporate matchmaking occurred. Everyone was expected to attend, especially rising stars like Amelia. Amelia had planned her strategy meticulously. She wore a beautiful, professional navy dress, nothing too flashy, and she positioned herself near the appetizer station, which offered a natural flow of conversation without getting cornered. She knew she had to mention Ethan early and often. "No, I couldn't possibly dance. Ethan gets jealous when I dance with anyone but him," she'd joke. "This champagne is nice, But Ethan prefers the vintage stuff we had in Paris last month, she'd casually drop. It was working until Harold Peterson cornered her near the ice sculpture. Harold Peterson was a vice president in commercial lending. He was 45, divorced twice, and had a persistent, unsettling stare. He was precisely the kind of man Ethan Miller was invented to repel. "Amelia," Harold purred, leaning in too close, smelling strongly of scotch and disappointment. "You look stunning tonight. Absolutely stunning." Amelia offered a tight, polite smile. "Thank you, Harold. You look very presidential." "I was wondering," Harold continued, ignoring her attempt at deflection, "since your gentleman isn't here, and I haven't seen him at any company function ever, which is a shame, really, if maybe we could slip out early. There's a quiet little place I know." Amelia felt the familiar spike of panic and irritation. She was tired. She had to be up at 5 a.m. She didn't want to be polite anymore. She needed to end this right now with extreme prejudice. She took a deep breath, channeling the confidence of a woman whose imaginary boyfriend was a global titan. "Harold," she said, her voice dropping to a serious, almost warning tone. "I appreciate the offer truly, but I'm really not available. Ethan and I are serious, very serious." Harold scoffed a little too loudly. "Serious? You never bring him around. Come on, Amelia. Is he even real? You seem awfully available for a woman in a serious relationship." That was it. The gauntlet had been thrown. The integrity of Ethan Miller was being questioned. Amelia had to go nuclear. She looked Harold dead in the eye, giving him the most pitying, slightly smug expression she could muster. "Harold, Ethan is absolutely real. And the reason I don't bring him to work functions is because he hates them. He's extremely private. He's currently in Geneva negotiating a major acquisition, something involving 3 continents and $1 billion. And honestly, if he heard that a VP at Vance Corp was pressuring me, he wouldn't just be mad at me, he'd probably look into buying your entire division just to fire you. He's very protective, Harold. I wouldn't risk it." She didn't just say the lie, she sold it. She injected the perfect blend of pride, warning, and slight exasperation, implying that dating a man of Ethan's stature was both a blessing and a burden. Harold Peterson's face went pale. The idea that her boyfriend had the power and the temperament to dismantle his entire career over a drunken proposition was terrifying enough to make him retreat instantly. Right, Amelia. I apologize. Enjoy your evening." He practically fled toward the restroom. Amelia let out a tiny, silent sigh of victory. Victory for the phantom boyfriend. She had done it. She had secured her peace for the rest of the night. She turned to grab a shrimp cocktail, feeling a rush of adrenaline. And that's when she saw him. Julian Vance, the CEO. Julian Vance was the reason Vance Corp existed. He was 38 years old, devastatingly handsome in the way men who control global markets often are. Sharp suit, piercing blue eyes, and an aura of intense, almost painful intelligence. He was an absolute legend in finance, a true innovator, and notoriously private. He rarely attended these galas, and when he did, he usually stayed hidden in the executive lounge. He was standing maybe 10 feet away, leaning against a pillar, talking quietly to the firm's general counsel, Mr. Sterling. Except Mr. Sterling was talking, and Julian Vance was watching Amelia. Julian Vance had been standing there long enough to hear every single word of her dramatic declaration to Harold Peterson. Every word about Ethan, the billion-dollar deal, the protective nature, and the threat to buy out an entire division. Amelia's blood ran cold. She felt the champagne suddenly curdle in her stomach. The CEO wasn't just looking at her, he was assessing her, his expression utterly unreadable. His eyes, usually distant and focused on some far-off financial projection, were fixed on her face with a strange intensity. She quickly averted her gaze, pretending to be deeply fascinated by the arrangement of decorative ice chips. "He didn't hear me. He couldn't have heard me. He was talking to Mr. Sterling. But when she risked another glance, Mr. Sterling was gone. Julian Vance was still there, now holding a glass of water, his posture relaxed, yet radiating a focused power that made the air around him feel thin. He gave her the smallest, most infinitesimal nod, the kind of acknowledgement a king might give a particularly well-behaved subject, and then he finally moved, walking slowly toward the main exit of the ballroom. Amelia didn't move for 5 minutes. Her heart was pounding against her ribs like a trapped bird. Oh God, he heard me. The CEO of a billion-dollar company heard me dramatically invent a billion-dollar boyfriend just to avoid Harold Peterson. She spent the rest of the evening in a state of hyper-anxiety, convinced that Julian Vance was going to call her into his office on Monday morning, not to fire her, but to ask why she felt the need to lie so elaborately about her personal life. The idea was absurd, but Julian Vance was known for his obsession with integrity and transparency within the firm. The next morning, Amelia arrived at the office early, desperate to bury herself in work and pretend the gala and the CEO's piercing gaze had never happened. She was reviewing a massive spreadsheet detailing logistics for an upcoming client summit when her internal phone buzzed. It was Ms. Davies, Julian Vance's executive assistant. Ms. Davies was the gatekeeper, a woman whose voice was as smooth and cold as polished marble. "Amelia, Mr. Vance would like to see you in his office immediately." Amelia's stomach plummeted. "Immediately? Is this about the Jenkins account?" "Mr. Vance didn't specify the topic," Ms. Davies replied, her voice entirely devoid of inflection, "but he asked that you bring nothing with you." Bring nothing. That sounded ominous. Was this the firing? Was she about to be escorted out of the building for lying about her private life on company time? She nervously smoothed down her skirt and walked the long, silent corridor up to the executive floor. The 50th floor was quiet, luxurious, and intimidating. Ms. Davies pointed toward the massive dark mahogany door at the end of the hall. "Go right in. He's expecting you." Amelia pushed the door open and stepped inside Julian Vance's office. The room was stunning. It had floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Lake Michigan and the entire city skyline. Julian Vance was standing by the window, hands clasped behind his back, looking out at the vast expanse of the city he essentially commanded. He didn't turn around immediately, which only amplified Amelia's anxiety. The silence stretched, thick and uncomfortable. Finally, he turned. His expression was neutral, but his eyes were sharp. "Amelia," he said, his voice deep and controlled. It was a voice designed to command attention in a boardroom, not to discuss personal drama. "Mr. Vance," she managed, her voice a little shaky. "You asked to see me?" He walked slowly toward his enormous desk, resting his hip against the edge. He didn't invite her to sit down. This was a power play. "I did," he confirmed. "I was reviewing the performance reports for the quarter. Your efficiency ratings are outstanding, Amelia, truly excellent. Your work on the East Asia expansion logistics was flawless." Amelia felt a flicker of hope. Maybe this was a compliment, maybe a promotion. "Thank you, sir. However," he continued, his tone shifting slightly, "I also had a rather illuminating experience at the gala last night." Amelia tensed. "Here it comes. The sermon on corporate ethics." Julian Vance leaned forward just slightly. "I overheard your conversation with Mr. Peterson." Amelia swallowed hard. "Sir, I apologize for the unprofessional nature of that exchange. It won't happen again. I was simply trying to—" He cut her off, not with anger, but with a strange, cool curiosity. "You were trying to protect yourself, Amelia. I understand that. Mr. Peterson has been reprimanded before for inappropriate conduct, but that's not why I called you in here." He paused, looking directly at her, and the intensity of his gaze made her feel exposed. I called you in here because I want to know more about Ethan Miller. Amelia's brain short-circuited. What? Ethan, sir? Yes, Ethan Miller, Julian Vance repeated, as if discussing a major client. The gentleman currently negotiating a multi-continental billion-dollar acquisition in Geneva. The gentleman who is apparently so protective of his girlfriend that he threatens the careers of my vice presidents. Julian Vance wasn't smiling, but there was a definite glint in his eye. It was the look of a man who had encountered a fascinating puzzle. That sounds like a man I should know, Julian continued smoothly. A man with that kind of global reach and negotiating power is someone I should be tracking. Is he with Rothschild? Goldman Sachs? I confess, the name Miller isn't immediately ringing a bell. Amelia was caught. She couldn't admit she lied. Not now. Not when the CEO was treating her fictional boyfriend like a potential business partner or a serious threat. She had to double down. He's very niche, Mr. Vance, she stammered, scrambling for details. He runs his own highly specialized boutique firm. They handle complex closed-door mergers. Very discreet. He prefers to keep a low profile. A boutique firm, Julian mused, nodding slowly. That explains the anonymity. And you say he's in Geneva? Yes, sir. Just landed yesterday. He's working around the clock. Julian walked back to his desk and picked up a silver pen, idly turning it over in his fingers. Amelia, I have a massive opportunity coming up. It's a hostile takeover situation involving a huge logistics company in the Pacific Northwest. It's messy. It requires aggressive, fast-moving, highly confidential maneuvering. My current team is too visible. He looked up, meeting her gaze. I need someone with the kind of ruthlessness and discretion you described in Ethan Miller. Someone who operates outside the usual channels, who isn't afraid to get their hands dirty. If this man is as good as you claim, I want to meet him. I want to discuss bringing him on as a consultant for this project. Amelia's jaw nearly dropped. This was beyond bad. This wasn't just about a dating shield anymore. This was about a billion-dollar CEO trying to hire her fictional boyfriend for a hostile takeover. Sir, with all due respect, I don't think that's possible, Amelia said, trying desperately to sound professional and not panicked. Ethan is incredibly focused on his current deal. He won't even call me back promptly. He's simply too busy for any new commitments. Julian Vance didn't look disappointed. He looked challenged. Amelia, everyone has a price, and everyone has a moment they can be convinced to take on a challenge, especially men who operate at that level. I need this deal done. And if this Ethan Miller is the shark you described, I want him in the water for Vance Corp. He paused, a slight smile finally touching the corner of his mouth, a predatory CEO smile. I'm going to make you an offer, Amelia. I am promoting you, effective immediately, to senior analyst. You've earned it. Your salary will be adjusted accordingly. Amelia felt a surge of elation, the promotion she had worked so hard for. But, Julian added, the word landing like a weight, your first and most crucial assignment in this new role is to facilitate the introduction. You are to be the liaison. I want you to convince Ethan Miller to take a meeting with me. Fly to Geneva if you have to. I need him here within the next 2 weeks. Amelia felt the cold dread return, heavier than before. She had just been promoted, but the cost was turning her carefully constructed lie into a corporate mandate. Mr. Vance, I really don't think he's going to be available, she repeated, her voice weaker this time. Julian Vance pushed off the desk and walked around to stand right in front of her, leaning down slightly. He was tall, and the proximity was unnerving. Amelia, I don't believe in excuses. If Ethan Miller is your boyfriend, then you know his schedule, you know his weaknesses, and you know how to talk to him. I am giving you a direct order. Bring Ethan Miller to me. He straightened up, his tone softening only slightly, becoming more inquisitive. Unless, of course, there's something you're not telling me about Ethan Miller. Amelia knew this was the moment to confess, to admit the lie, to risk the promotion and the job. But looking at Julian Vance, seeing the absolute conviction in his eyes, the belief that the man she described was real and valuable, she couldn't do it. Confessing now would not just be embarrassing, it would paint her as a manipulative, dishonest employee right when she was supposed to be moving up. It would destroy her credibility entirely. The lie had become too big. So, Amelia did the only thing she felt she could do. She put on her best professional mask, took another deep breath, and committed to the deception. "No, sir, there's nothing I'm not telling you," she lied, her voice firm. "Ethan is real, he's just complicated. I will contact him. I will do my best to convince him to meet you." Julian Vance smiled then, a genuine, satisfied, dangerous smile. "Good. I knew you could handle it, Amelia. Now, I suggest you start making those calls to Geneva. I'm very eager to meet the man who can threaten to buy out my VPs." Amelia walked out of that office in a daze. She had the promotion, the salary bump, and the corner office she dreamed of, but she also had a new, terrifying job description. Produce one highly successful, high-powered, entirely non-existent boyfriend, or lose everything. And as she sat down at her new desk, staring blankly at the spreadsheets, she realized the deepest irony of it all. Julian Vance, the CEO who had never noticed her beyond her efficiency reports, was now completely obsessed with the one man in her life who was pure fiction. He wouldn't leave her alone until she delivered Ethan Miller, and Amelia had absolutely no idea how she was going to pull off the biggest performance of her life. The game was officially on, and the stakes were astronomical. She was trapped, and the man who held the key to her freedom was the very CEO who wouldn't stop chasing her non-existent boyfriend. The shock of that meeting didn't wear off. Amelia sat at her brand-new polished mahogany desk, which was slightly larger and faced the window, a genuine perk of the senior analyst role, and she felt like she was watching her career burn down in slow motion. She had the promotion. She had the raise. And she had a deadline to deliver a fictional man to the CEO of Vance Corp. The biggest problem wasn't just that Ethan didn't exist. It was that Julian Vance was now focused on her. Before, she was a highly efficient cog in a massive machine. Now, she was the sole point of contact for a crucial, high-stakes project, and that project was hinged entirely on her ability to manage a lie. Amelia realized she couldn't just ghost Julian Vance. He was the CEO. He expected updates, frequent updates. She spent the first day researching boutique M&A firms and hostile takeover strategies to arm herself with enough jargon to sound credible. She needed Ethan Miller to sound like a rare, precious commodity that Julian Vance was lucky to even be allowed to sniff. The first check-in came late Wednesday afternoon. Julian Vance didn't call her. He simply appeared in the doorway of her new office. He didn't knock. He just stood there, filling the frame in his customary flawless suit. "Progress, Amelia?" he asked, his voice calm but with an underlying demand. Amelia immediately put on her best professional exhaustion face. "Mr. Vance, I've been working on it non-stop. The difficulty, as I anticipated, is his current level of engagement. His Geneva deal is extremely sensitive. He's operating completely off the grid. No cell service, no standard email. Everything is going through a secure, encrypted satellite communication system." Julian nodded slowly, processing this. He didn't look skeptical. He looked impressed. Highly disciplined. That speaks volumes about his operational security. "Exactly," Amelia seized the opening. "He's only communicating with me via short-coded messages on a burner phone he keeps in a safe. I managed to relay your offer, emphasizing the confidentiality and the aggressive nature of the Pacific Northwest target." "And his response?" Julian pressed, stepping closer to her desk. Amelia lowered her voice slightly, leaning in as if sharing state secrets. "He was intrigued, sir. He appreciates the scale. However, he also made it clear that he will not compromise his current position. He said, and I quote, "Tell your CEO that I don't break contracts, only companies." Julian Vance actually let out a low chuckle. It wasn't a friendly laugh. It was the sound of a predator recognizing another predator. Excellent. That's exactly the temperament we need. A man of integrity, even when he's being ruthless. Tell me, Amelia, how does he handle the financing on these closed-door deals? Does he use a specific international bank, or is he leveraging private equity? Amelia's mind scrambled. Finance was her area of expertise, but she had to invent a completely new, untraceable system for Ethan. He uses his own independent trust, Mr. Vance, based in Liechtenstein. It's entirely self-funded and completely untraceable through standard U.S. regulatory bodies. It allows him to move capital instantly without the bureaucratic delays of a major bank. Liechtenstein. She had picked a country because it sounded discreet and expensive. Julian's eyes narrowed slightly, but again, he seemed to accept it as an ingenious, if slightly shady, maneuver. A man who trusts no one. I respect that. Keep pushing, Amelia. Offer him a percentage of the final valuation, not just a flat fee. Make it worth his time to risk shifting focus. Understood, sir, Amelia said, relieved. The meeting was over. She had bought herself another day, and Ethan Miller had just been given a trust fund in a tiny European principality. But Julian didn't leave. He lingered, resting his hand on the corner of her desk. "Amelia," he said, his tone changing slightly, becoming less CEO and more something else. "Does this constant travel and high-pressure work ever strain your relationship? It must be difficult dating a man who only communicates via coded messages." Amelia felt a blush creep up her neck. This was the territory she had tried so hard to avoid. The CEO was asking about her love life. "It is, sir," she admitted, trying to sound wistful but strong. "But we understand each other. We both respect the demands of high-level finance. We make time when we can. Mostly, we communicate through shared goals and mutual respect." "Mutual respect," Julian repeated, a thoughtful look on his face. "That is rare at that level. He's a lucky man, Amelia. Don't let him forget that." And with that, he left, leaving Amelia breathless and wondering if she was being complimented, assessed, or warned. The pressure didn't ease. Julian Vance had officially designated the Ethan Miller project as his top priority. He bypassed Ms. Davies, his executive assistant, entirely, communicating directly with Amelia. He started sending her messages at 10 p.m. Not work messages exactly, but questions designed to gather more intelligence on Ethan. Vance, 10:15 p.m. Does Miller prefer fixed-rate or floating-rate debt structures in his acquisitions, trying to anticipate his cash flow demands? Amelia would have to invent a sophisticated preference. Amelia, 10:28 p.m. Floating. He believes in dynamic risk management. VIX structures limit his ability to pivot during market volatility. Vance, 10:30 p.m. Smart. A true gambler. Sometimes the messages got even more personal, still disguised as professional interest. Vance, 9:45 p.m. You mentioned he was protective. What exactly does he do when he feels someone has crossed a line? Does he use legal means or something more direct? Amelia hated answering these, as it forced her to paint Ethan as increasingly aggressive. Amelia, 9:55 p.m. He never breaks the law, Mr. Vance, but his network is vast. He uses highly persuasive economic leverage. He makes people understand the true cost of their mistakes. The CEO's interest in Ethan had a terrifying side effect. Julian Vance was spending more time in Amelia's presence than he spent with his entire executive board combined. He would often call her up to the 50th floor just to stand by the window and discuss, in broad theoretical terms, what a man of Ethan Miller's caliber must be thinking. "He's not just a consultant, Amelia," Julian mused one afternoon, staring out at the skyscrapers. He's a mirror, a reflection of what happens when ambition is entirely unbound by corporate rules. Tell me what drives him. Is it money, power, or is it simply the thrill of the win? Amelia, standing respectfully a few feet away, had to psychoanalyze her imaginary boyfriend. It's the challenge, Mr. Vance. He views the global market as a giant, complex chessboard. He doesn't care about the trophies. He cares about proving his strategy is superior. Julian turned and looked at her, his blue eyes intense. And you, Amelia? What drives you? Is it the same? That question caught her off guard. It wasn't about Ethan anymore. I'm driven by results, sir. I want to build a career based on flawless execution and strategic foresight. Flawless execution, Julian repeated, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. You've certainly executed the logistics of keeping Ethan Miller present, even when he's absent. It was a compliment, wrapped in an observation that came dangerously close to calling out her deception. Amelia needed to vent. She needed to tell someone how close she was to cracking. She went to lunch with Sarah, her work confidant. You won't believe what happened, Amelia whispered, hunched over a salad in a crowded downtown bistro. Julian Vance is obsessed. He thinks Ethan is some kind of financial James Bond. Sarah, who was Amelia's age but had a wonderfully cynical view of the corporate world, nearly choked on her iced tea. Wait, the Julian Vance, the one who looks like he was sculpted by an angry Greek god? He's asking about your pretend boyfriend? He's not just asking, Sarah. He's trying to hire him for a hostile takeover. He's using my promotion as leverage. He literally won't leave me alone until I produce Ethan Miller. Sarah stared at her wide-eyed. Amelia, this is insane. This is like a corporate farce. You invented a man to keep the minor league creeps away, and now the CEO is trying to make $1 billion deal with him. And the worst part, Julian is starting to ask personal questions about Ethan. He thinks Ethan is a genius. I had to invent a self-funded trust in Liechtenstein. Liechtenstein, Sarah. You're amazing, Sarah whispered, shaking her head in awe. But you have to end this. You have to kill Ethan Miller off. Give him a fatal case of corporate acquisition fatigue. Amelia shook her head miserably. I can't. Julian Vance respects Ethan. If Ethan suddenly vanished, Julian would question my judgment, my credibility. I just got this promotion. I need to keep the charade going long enough for the Pacific Northwest deal to fall apart naturally, or for Julian to find a new shiny toy. So, what's the next move? Amelia took a deep breath. I need to make Ethan appear extremely valuable, but also extremely unavailable. I need a bigger excuse than Geneva. The next week, Julian Vance escalated his efforts. He called Amelia into his office, and this time, Ms. Davies was present taking notes. This was now a formal operation. Amelia, Julian began, leaning over a map of the Pacific Northwest. We are running out of time. The target company, Summit Logistics, is getting nervous. We need to strike fast. I need Miller here next week. I've chartered a private jet. It's on standby at O'Hare. Tell him to name the airport, and we will pick him up anywhere in the world. No customs, no delays. Amelia's mind raced. A private jet. This was an actual, tangible resource being deployed for her imaginary man. Mr. Vance, I appreciate the extraordinary effort, Amelia said smoothly, trying to sound genuinely stressed. But Ethan won't agree to that. He's obsessive about operational security and anonymity. Using Vance Corp's private jet is too high profile. It would expose his involvement before he's ready to strike. Julian frowned. He won't use a clean, fully secure corporate asset. No, sir. He handles all his own logistics. He prefers to fly commercial, using multiple layovers, and always under a temporary alias. It's part of his methodology. Julian leaned back, considering this. Frustrating, but consistent with his character. Fine. Then, Amelia, you must go to him. Amelia blinked. Sir? This project is too important to leave to encrypted messages, Julian stated firmly. You are the only person he trusts. I need you to fly to him, present the full confidential briefing packet, and convince him face to face. I want you to tell him that if he takes this on, he will have my complete, unrestricted confidence and resources. He gestured to Ms. Davies. Ms. Davies, book Amelia a first-class ticket to Geneva, departing tomorrow morning. Get her a 5-star hotel room near the financial district. I want daily updates on your progress, Amelia. Amelia was reeling. She had just been ordered to fly to Geneva to meet a man who didn't exist. She couldn't say no. That would be refusing a direct high-level assignment. Mr. Vance, I don't think Geneva is his location anymore, Amelia stammered, scrambling to change the setting. His deal there has shifted dramatically. He's had to move quickly to a new location to secure a critical asset. Julian raised an eyebrow. Where is he now, Amelia? She needed somewhere remote, somewhere difficult to reach quickly, and somewhere that offered a good cover story for a few days of solitude. He's in Iceland, she declared, the word popping out of her mouth entirely at random. He's doing a highly specialized closed-door negotiation in Reykjavik, something involving geothermal energy futures and offshore drilling rights. Julian paused. Iceland. It sounded suitably remote, cold and discreet. Iceland, Julian mused. Unexpected. All right. Miss Davies, cancel Geneva. Book Amelia a first-class ticket to Reykjavik, departing tomorrow, and give Amelia a generous per diem. This is a crucial mission. Amelia left the office feeling faint. She was going to Iceland, alone, to pretend to negotiate with Ethan Miller. The next day, Amelia was at O'Hare waiting for her flight. She was equipped with a huge, confidential briefing binder from Julian Vance, a new laptop with specialized security software, provided by the company naturally, and a growing sense of panic. She texted Sarah a frantic update. Amelia, I'm at the airport, headed to Iceland. Seriously, the CEO sent me. Sarah, OMG, you are actually flying to a different continent to talk to your imagination. This is peak corporate insanity. Amelia, I know. I have to spend 3 days in Reykjavik pretending to be an intense negotiation. What do I even tell Julian when I get back? Sarah, you tell him Ethan agreed, but only under the most ridiculous, demanding, and impossible terms. Make him so expensive and difficult that Julian has to back off. Amelia boarded the plane, trying to plan her 3-day charade. She decided she would use the time to finally complete the MBA coursework she had been neglecting. But the moment her flight landed in Reykjavik, Julian Vance's intensity ramped up. Amelia checked into the high-end hotel Julian had booked overlooking the harbor. Before she could even take off her coat, her secure company phone buzzed. It was Julian. Vance. Landed safely? Have you made contact? Amelia, yes, sir, just arrived. I've initiated contact. Ethan is highly focused on his current deal, but he has agreed to a short window this evening. Vance, excellent. I need to know his initial assessment of Summit logistics. What are the vulnerabilities he immediately identifies? Don't hold back. Amelia spent the next 3 hours locked in her hotel room, not studying, but analyzing the Summit logistics brief Julian had given her. She had to think like a ruthless, anonymous acquisitions specialist. She had to think like Ethan Miller. She sent Julian a highly detailed, devastatingly insightful analysis of Summit's structural weaknesses, focusing on their over-reliance on a single supplier network and their exposed real estate assets in volatile markets. Amelia, 9 p.m. Reykjavik time. Ethan believes the supplier vulnerability is the key. He suggests a simultaneous buyout of their 3 main suppliers, effectively cutting off their lifeblood before the hostile bid is even announced. He calls it starving the beast. Do. The response was instantaneous. Vance, 5 p.m. Chicago time. Brilliant, simple, elegant, and entirely unethical. It confirms his reputation. Keep pushing, Amelia. Tell him the terms are negotiable, but the objective is non-negotiable: control. Amelia realized that in inventing Ethan Miller, she was actually inventing her own ruthless, strategic alter ego. The analysis she had just sent Julian was, frankly, better than anything the standard Vance Corp team would produce. She was using the mask of Ethan to express her own aggressive, strategic mind. The negotiations continued over the next 2 days, entirely via Amelia's secure phone, which she carried around the desolate, beautiful landscape of Iceland, taking pictures for proof of her location. Julian Vance was relentless. He wasn't just receiving updates. He was engaging in a theoretical dialogue with Ethan Miller, using Amelia as the conduit. He would send her complex financial models and ask Ethan's opinion on the risk exposure. Julian's focus on Ethan had become a fixation. It was almost competitive. He wanted to understand this man who operated outside the rules he himself had to follow. On the 3rd day, Amelia knew she had to deliver a definitive answer. She had to make Ethan so demanding that Julian would have to choose between the deal and the consultant. She crafted the final message carefully. Amelia, 11 a.m. Reykjavik time. Mr. Vance, I had a final lengthy meeting with Ethan. He is willing to take on Summit Logistics, but his terms are non-negotiable given the high-risk, high-reward nature of his involvement. Vance, name them. Amelia. First, 10% of the final acquisition profit paid into the Liechtenstein Trust immediately upon closing. Second, complete operational autonomy. He reports only to you, sir, and his methods cannot be questioned by anyone on the board or in legal. Julian's response was slow in coming. 5 agonizing minutes. Vance. The compensation is high but acceptable. The autonomy is dangerous but necessary. What is the 3rd term? Amelia typed the final, devastating condition. This was the escape hatch. Amelia. His 3rd condition is that he must remain completely anonymous. His involvement must be untraceable. He will only communicate through me, Amelia Hayes, for the duration of the project. I must be his sole point of contact, his eyes and ears within Vance Corp, and his voice in all internal meetings. He insists on this absolute layer of separation. This was the masterstroke. It was professional, it was demanding, and most importantly, it permanently cemented Amelia's role as the indispensable middleman. If Julian wanted Ethan, he had to go through Amelia, forever. It ensured she kept her job and kept Julian Vance focused on her. Julian's reply was almost immediate. Vance, done. Tell Ethan Miller he has a deal. Welcome him to the team, Amelia. You have done an extraordinary job. Book your flight home. We start immediately. Amelia collapsed back onto the king-size bed in her hotel room, staring at the ceiling. She had done it. Ethan Miller was officially hired by Vance Corp for a hostile takeover. But the panic didn't subside. She hadn't killed the lie. She had just given it an executive parking spot. Amelia returned to Chicago the next day, exhausted but exhilarated. Julian Vance was waiting for her. Not in his office, but in the private, secure conference room on the 50th floor, along with the General Counsel, Mr. Sterling, and the CFO, Mr. Chen. Amelia, a newly minted senior analyst, was suddenly sitting at the table with the top 3 executives of the company. Julian looked at her with an expression of intense respect. Amelia, you have secured the most important asset for this project. Ethan Miller is now officially running the acquisition strategy. I have accepted his terms. He turned to the CFO and General Counsel. Amelia Hayes will be our sole liaison with Mr. Miller. All communications, all strategy reports, and all directives from Miller will flow through her. She has his complete trust, and therefore, she has ours. no exceptions. Mr. Sterling, the General Counsel, looked skeptical. Mr. Vance, with all due respect, we are committing 10% of the profit to an anonymous consultant who refuses to sign a standard contract and who we have never met. This is a massive liability. What if he's compromised? Julian looked back at Amelia. Amelia, what is Ethan Miller's guarantee? Amelia knew this was critical. She had to give Ethan an ironclad reputation. Sir, Ethan Miller doesn't need a contract. His guarantee is his reputation. He has never failed an acquisition, and he never accepts payment until the deal is 100% closed. If he walks away, he gets nothing. He operates on performance, not promises. Julian Vance smiled, the predatory gleam back in his eyes. There you have it, Sterling. Performance over paper. If he fails, we lose nothing but time. If he succeeds, we gain $1 billion company. Now, let's get started. And so began the true nightmare. The Ethan Miller project was now entirely dependent on Amelia's ability to invent, minute by minute, a complex, aggressive, and brilliant acquisition strategy. Amelia's life became a blur. She would spend her days pretending to be Amelia Hayes, the competent senior analyst, attending meetings and taking notes. Then late at night, she would transform into Ethan Miller, the ruthless consultant drafting highly aggressive memos and detailed, cutting strategies that Julian Vance would then implement the next day. Julian Vance was utterly captivated by Ethan's genius. He would often call Amelia into his office late in the evening after everyone else had left. The CEO was working 18-hour days, fueled by the adrenaline of the hostile takeover, and Amelia was right there with him. "Look at this, Amelia," Julian would say, pointing at a complex flowchart she had invented as Ethan. "He's anticipated their defensive move perfectly. He's 2 moves ahead. He's a chess master." He wasn't just discussing the strategy, he was discussing her strategy, but he only saw it as Ethan's. One evening, Amelia was so exhausted from working 2 personas that she nearly made a critical mistake. Julian had asked her what Ethan thought of a potential legal loophole. Amelia, tired and hungry, started to answer instantly, using her normal voice and her own analysis. "Well, I think the loophole is too obvious. They will anticipate it, and we should focus on the regulatory vulnerability instead." Julian looked at her, tilting his head. "Wait, is that Amelia's analysis or Ethan's?" Amelia froze. She had almost admitted the truth. That's what Ethan messaged me 5 minutes ago, Mr. Vance," she lied quickly, trying to project the image of a busy executive relaying a message. "He dictates his thoughts quickly. The regulatory angle is his priority." Julian nodded, satisfied. "Good. Tell him to draft a full memo on the regulatory angle by morning. And Amelia," he added, his voice softer now, "you look exhausted. You need to take care of yourself. Ethan needs you sharp." He was treating her like a valuable corporate resource, the single point of failure for his entire operation. He wasn't focused on her appearance or her availability for a date. He was intensely focused on her well-being because she was the only link to the man he desperately needed. The irony was crushing. Julian Vance wouldn't leave her alone, but only because he was chasing the ghost of the man she had invented. The situation came to a head when Julian Vance decided the takeover required a physical presence. "Ethan Miller's strategies are brilliant, Amelia, but we need boots on the ground," Julian announced one morning. "We need someone in Seattle who can execute the starving the beast supplier buyouts with precision and absolute secrecy. Someone who can operate under Ethan's direct command." He looked at Amelia, his gaze firm. "Since Ethan won't show his face, you will be his representative. You are flying to Seattle tonight. You will open a temporary anonymous office, and you will coordinate the initial phase of the acquisition. You will be Ethan Miller's voice, Amelia. You will be his proxy." Amelia was speechless. She was no longer just inventing the strategy, she was now being sent across the country to execute the strategy, literally acting as Ethan Miller in the field. "Sir, I'm an analyst. I haven't handled field operations before," Amelia protested weakly. "You are Ethan Miller's liaison," Julian countered, his tone allowing no argument. "You have been immersed in his strategy for weeks. You are the only one who truly understands his methods. You are the only one I trust to do this, without questions or leaks." He paused, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. "And honestly, Amelia, I believe you have more of Ethan Miller's ruthlessness in you than you realize." He handed her a black briefcase. It was heavy. "This contains a secure satellite phone, classified documents, and a significant cash advance for operational expenses. Get the job done. I want daily video reports from you, Amelia. You report directly to me, and only to me." Amelia flew to Seattle that night, carrying the weight of the lie and the heavy briefcase. She was now completely isolated, thousands of miles from her home office, tasked with implementing a hostile takeover strategy devised by her own fictitious boyfriend. As she stepped off the plane in Seattle, the damp Pacific air hitting her face, she realized the game had moved past the point of simple professional deception. She was no longer lying about Ethan Miller. She was Ethan Miller, and Julian Vance was watching her every move. She had to be brilliant, she had to be ruthless, and she had to succeed. Because if she failed, Julian wouldn't just be disappointed in Amelia Hayes. He would be utterly furious with Ethan Miller, and Amelia would be the one to pay the price for both. The CEO had successfully maneuvered her into a corner, and now the only way out was through the lie. Amelia was now operating in the shadows of the Pacific Northwest, and the air was thick with the scent of pine and high-stakes finance. She had rented a small, nondescript office space in a corporate park outside Seattle, paid for entirely in cash from the heavy briefcase Julian Vance had handed her. This was the headquarters of the invisible Ethan Miller. Her first task was to execute the starving the beast strategy. This meant discreetly acquiring the three main suppliers that Summit Logistics relied upon. It was a brutal, complex maneuver that required rapid, untraceable transactions and iron nerves. Amelia found herself thriving. Working under the guise of Ethan Miller's Proxy gave her an incredible, terrifying freedom. When she was Amelia Hayes, she had to navigate corporate bureaucracy and politeness. But as Ethan's representative, she was simply a force of nature. She didn't negotiate, she dictated terms. She used the cash advance to make aggressive, irresistible offers, backed by the implicit threat of the unseen, ruthless power of Ethan Miller and Vance Corp. Within 48 hours, she had secured two of the three suppliers. The third, a small, stubborn, family-owned trucking firm, was holding out. Julian Vance's interest was now a constant, buzzing presence. The video calls were the hardest part of the day. Every evening, Amelia would set up the secure laptop, making sure the background was suitably bland and professional. A blurry wall, not a view of the Seattle skyline. Julian would appear on the screen, usually still in his Chicago office, looking sharp and energized, despite the late hour. He wasn't just her boss. He was her single, intense audience. "Amelia, report on Supplier 3. Julian demanded during the second video call. "Ethan's strategy requires speed. We cannot allow Summit to suspect we are cutting off their supply lines." Amelia, who had just spent 6 hours arguing with a very suspicious family matriarch, took a deep breath. "Sir, Supplier 3 is unique. They are driven by legacy, not pure profit. Their owner, Ms. Jenkins, sees this as a moral issue, not a financial one. Ethan's initial valuation is insufficient. I need to relay a new directive from him." Julian leaned closer to the camera, his blue eyes narrowed with interest. "What is his directive?" "Ethan believes we must appeal to their sense of duty, not greed. He suggests we buy the company, but immediately offer Ms. Jenkins a lifetime, high-paying consulting role within Vance Corp, overseeing the new trucking division. It's an emotional buyout. It gives her the honor and legacy she craves, while giving us the assets we need. Julian was silent for a moment, processing this. Amelia felt her heart hammering. Had she gone too far? Was this too soft for the ruthless Ethan Miller? Then Julian smiled. It was a genuine, appreciative look. That is brilliant, Amelia. Pure brilliance. It's the kind of move a true strategist makes, anticipating human weakness, not just financial weakness. Tell Ethan I authorize the full consulting package. Draw up the paperwork immediately. Amelia hung up, shaking. She hadn't just saved the deal. She had elevated the imaginary Ethan Miller to a master manipulator of human psychology. And in doing so, she realized Julian Vance was becoming utterly fascinated, not just by the strategy, but by the mind behind it. Her mind. As the mission progressed, Julian's professional fixation began to bleed into something more complex. He didn't just ask about the deal, he asked about Ethan through her, trying to understand the man's motivations, which meant trying to understand her motivations. One afternoon, Julian sent a message that stopped Amelia dead in her tracks. Vance, 1:30 p.m. Amelia, I am reviewing Ethan's demands for absolute anonymity. It is highly unusual, even for a boutique firm. Why did he insist that you, and only you, be the conduit? Is there a history of professional betrayal that makes him so wary of direct communication? Amelia had to tread carefully. This was Julian digging for the personal connection. Amelia, 1:45 p.m. Mr. Vance, Ethan's secrecy is not about professional betrayal, it's about tactical advantage. If his identity is revealed, his unique methodology is compromised, making future closed-door deals impossible. Vance, 1:47 p.m. I understand the tactical advantage, but why you? Why not his general counsel or a trusted partner? Why is his shield a woman he is dating? This was the critical moment. Amelia had to invent a narrative of absolute loyalty and professional partnership. Amelia, 1:55 p.m. Sir, it's because our relationship, while personal, is built on a decade of shared professional history. We met years ago working on a complex insolvency case in New York. We learned to trust each other's judgment under extreme pressure. He trusts my analysis implicitly, and he knows I will prioritize his operational security above all else. I am not just his girlfriend, I am his most trusted professional partner. Julian's response was immediate and surprising. Vance, 2:00 p.m., a decade. That explains the depth of the trust. He is wise to recognize that kind of partnership, Amelia. It is rare in this industry. Amelia sighed with relief. She had successfully cemented her position. She wasn't just the girlfriend, she was the indispensable co-conspirator. The lie had grown roots, deep into her own history. The pressure mounted in Seattle. The starving the beast strategy was working. Summit Logistics was starting to feel the squeeze, and their stock price began to dip dramatically. Julian Vance was euphoric. He told Amelia he was flying out to Seattle to personally oversee the final phase, the public tender offer. I need to be on the ground, Amelia, he explained over the phone. I need to feel the pulse of the market, and I need to be close enough to receive Ethan's final, critical instructions instantly. Amelia's stomach twisted. Julian Vance was coming to her anonymous office. Her carefully controlled environment was about to be infiltrated by the one person she couldn't lie to face for extended periods. Julian arrived late Thursday evening, flying in on the Vance Corp private jet he had offered to Ethan. He didn't use the anonymous corporate park office. Instead, he took over the entire top floor of the Four Seasons Hotel downtown. Amelia was summoned immediately. When she walked into the massive, luxurious penthouse suite, Julian was standing by the window wearing a perfectly tailored dark suit, the lights of Seattle twinkling behind him. The room felt less like a hotel and more like a command center. "Amelia," he greeted her, his voice low and intense. "The execution has been flawless. Ethan's strategy is working better than I could have hoped. Summit is bleeding. We move in for the kill tomorrow morning." He motioned her to a large conference table covered in documents. For the next 3 hours, they worked side by side, reviewing the final numbers for the tender offer. This was different from the video calls. In person, Julian's intensity was magnified. He smelled faintly of expensive cologne and power. Every time their hands brushed over a spreadsheet, Amelia felt a jolt of anxiety, and perhaps something else she refused to name. Julian was utterly focused, but his focus on the strategy was inseparable from his focus on Amelia, the messenger. "Look at this projected cash flow, Amelia," Julian said, tapping the screen. "Ethan's modeling of their liquidation assets is aggressive, bordering on brilliant. He's leaving them zero wiggle room. Are you sure he's not trying to personally ruin the CEO of Summit? There seems to be a level of professional malice here." Amelia had to think fast. She couldn't let Ethan seem petty. "No, sir, not malice. It's efficiency. Ethan believes in maximizing the return on investment. He eliminates all emotional variables. He doesn't care about the CEO. He cares only about the asset acquisition." Julian looked at her, truly looked at her for a long moment. "You deliver his thoughts with such clarity, Amelia. You seem to understand the nuances of his ruthlessness better than anyone." He leaned back in his chair, suddenly shifting the focus. "Tell me, Amelia, when he's not dismantling billion-dollar companies, what is Ethan Miller like? I feel like I know his mind, but not the man." Amelia's internal alarm bells were screaming. This was the moment she had feared, the personal inquiry, face to face. "He's private, Mr. Vance," she managed, trying to sound genuinely protective. "He's incredibly focused. He rarely relaxes. He reads constantly, mostly history and military strategy. When he does take time off, it's usually for extreme sports, climbing, sailing in high winds, things that require absolute focus and control." "Control," Julian repeated, a thoughtful expression on his face. "Yes, that fits. A man who controls the market must control his environment. And does he ever discuss Vance Corp? Does he have an opinion of the firm or of me?" Amelia knew she had to flatter the CEO, but through Ethan's perspective, making it sound like a cold professional assessment. "He respects the scale of Vance Corp, sir. He sees the firm as a behemoth that needs to be steered precisely. He respects your ability to maintain control over such a vast organization. He views you as a worthy opponent and a powerful ally." Julian smiled, a genuine flash of satisfaction. "A worthy opponent. I'll take that. I look forward to the day I can actually shake his hand." They worked until 2 a.m. Amelia was exhausted, her brain swimming in financial jargon and invented personal history. As she gathered her things, Julian stood up. "Amelia, you've been working non-stop. I appreciate your dedication. Ethan has chosen his proxy wisely. You are performing brilliantly, truly. Now go get some sleep. Tomorrow is the final push." He walked her to the door of the suite. Just before she left, he put a hand lightly on her shoulder, a brief, professional gesture, yet the touch lingered, radiating warmth and authority. "Rest well, Amelia. We are a formidable team." The final phase of the acquisition, the public tender offer, was scheduled for 9 a.m. the next morning. It was a formal, high-profile event. Julian Vance, Mr. Chen, CFO, and Mr. Sterling, General Counsel, would be present in the Seattle office, ready to field questions and finalize the deal. Amelia's role, according to Julian, was to be the silent sentinel, the direct line to the ruthless genius who had designed the entire strategy. "Ethan Miller needs a voice in the room, Amelia," Julian instructed her that morning, his energy electric. someone who can confirm his directives if any last-minute questions arise. You are his eyes and ears. Do not speak unless spoken to, but be ready to convey his thoughts instantly. Amelia sat at the end of the long conference table, feeling the weight of the entire operation on her shoulders. She was surrounded by the highest echelon of Vance Corp, and she was the only one who knew the acquisition strategy was coming straight from her own tired, over-caffeinated brain. The meeting started. Julian Vance delivered the tender offer with surgical precision. Summit Logistics executives, led by their frantic CEO, Mr. Donovan, were clearly rattled. They knew they were beaten. Mr. Donovan fought back, however, attempting a last-ditch plea. "Mr. Vance, your offer is predatory. It is designed to dismantle a century of hard work. We know this strategy. It is ruthless, cold, and utterly lacking in human decency. We know who is behind this. We know this is the work of a financial shark, an anonymous operator who hides in the shadows." Donovan pointed directly at Amelia. "We heard the rumors. That man, Ethan Miller, he's a ghost. He's a mercenary. He won't even show his face to defend his own tactics. Why? Because they are indefensible." The room went silent. Mr. Sterling looked nervous. Julian Vance, however, looked furious, not at the accusation but at the disrespect shown to his chosen strategist. Julian stood up, towering over the table. "Mr. Donovan, the strategy is sound, and it is entirely legal. And Ethan Miller, while private, is a man of impeccable professional integrity. His methods are aggressive, yes, but they are effective. He does not hide. He maintains operational security." Mr. Donovan pressed his advantage, desperate. "Then where is he? If he is so confident in his strategy, let his proxy speak. Let her defend the ethics of this hostile takeover." Julian looked at Amelia. This was the moment. The situation had escalated beyond simple relaying of messages. Ethan Miller's reputation was being publicly attacked. "Amelia," Julian commanded, his voice sharp and compelling. "You are Ethan Miller's representative. You understand his mindset better than anyone. Tell Mr. Donovan why this takeover is not only justified, but inevitable. Speak for Ethan." Amelia's heart pounded. She couldn't send a coded message now. She had to speak, out loud, as Ethan Miller. She pushed back her chair and stood up. She straightened her spine, channeling the confidence she had been forced to invent. She looked Mr. Donovan dead in the eye, dropping all traces of Amelia Hayes's politeness. "Mr. Donovan," she began, her voice clear and startlingly firm, "Ethan Miller does not deal in ethics, he deals in efficiency. Your company failed to adapt to global logistics shifts. Your reliance on antiquated infrastructure and exposed assets made you vulnerable. When an organization fails to evolve, it becomes a liability to the market. This takeover is not predatory, it is corrective. It is inevitable. The market is not kind to the weak. You were slow, and now you are acquired." She paused, letting the silence hang. She felt Julian Vance's intense gaze fixed on her, but she didn't look away from Donovan. "Ethan Miller doesn't hide because his methods are indefensible. He hides because his methods are proprietary. And the proof of their effectiveness is sitting right here. Your company is about to be absorbed by Vance Corp. Sign the papers, Mr. Donovan. The time for sentiment is over." The words, her words, were cold, sharp, and devastating. The Summit CEO looked utterly defeated. The General Counsel, Mr. Sterling, looked impressed. Julian Vance, however, looked mesmerized. He slowly sat down, never taking his eyes off Amelia. He didn't need to say another word. The deal was done. Mr. Donovan, deflated, quietly signaled his legal team to proceed. The deal closed late that afternoon. The atmosphere in the penthouse suite was celebratory, but Julian Vance remained unnaturally calm. Once the executives from Summit had left and the General Counsel and CFO were busy coordinating the press release, Julian finally turned to Amelia. He walked toward her, stopping just inches away. The proximity was overwhelming. "Amelia," he said, his voice quiet, almost a whisper. "That was extraordinary. The clarity, the precision, the sheer ruthlessness. You channeled him perfectly." He reached out and gently took her hand, squeezing it once. "Tell Ethan Miller that he has just secured $1 billion asset for Vance Corp, and he has proven himself to be the most formidable strategist I have ever encountered. His compensation will be wired to Liechtenstein immediately." He still held her hand, his thumb resting on her pulse point. "And tell him, Amelia," Julian continued, his gaze searching hers, "that he is incredibly lucky. He is lucky to have a partner who understands his mind so intimately, who can articulate his genius with such force. You are far more than a liaison, Amelia. You are his weapon." Amelia felt dizzy. Julian Vance was touching her, praising her brilliance, but attributing it all to the ghost she had manufactured. She wanted to scream the truth, but the taste of power, the power of Ethan, was intoxicating. She gently pulled her hand away, maintaining professionalism. "I will relay the message, Mr. Vance. Ethan will be pleased with the efficiency of the closing." Julian didn't press the physical contact, but his eyes held a new, burning curiosity. "I need to understand something, Amelia. You said you've known him for a decade. You trust him implicitly, but he lives in the shadows, constantly moving. Does he ever worry that this lifestyle, this anonymity, will eventually cost him the one person he actually trusts?" Amelia knew he wasn't asking about Ethan's fear. He was trying to assess her vulnerability, her commitment to the ghost. "Ethan understands the cost of his work, sir," Amelia said, trying to project a deep, painful commitment. "But our relationship is unconventional. We value the moments we have, however rare. We prioritize the shared goal, building something untouchable." Julian nodded slowly. He looked almost wistful, a rare emotion for the usually impenetrable CEO. "Untouchable. Yes, I respect that. But sometimes, Amelia, even the untouchable things need to be brought into the light." He didn't elaborate, but the comment hung in the air, suggesting a challenge to Ethan's anonymity that Amelia had successfully defended so far. Amelia returned to Chicago the next day, a conquering hero. Julian Vance immediately elevated her status within the firm. She was now the official project coordinator for the entire Summit Logistics integration, reporting only to him. Her new, higher salary was confirmed, and she was given a permanent, expansive corner office on the 50th floor, right next to Julian Vance's private suite. She had officially entered the corporate stratosphere, but her life was now a complete fabrication. She spent every waking moment either executing Ethan's, her strategies, or fielding Julian's intense inquiries about Ethan, her. Julian Vance was relentless in his pursuit of Ethan Miller. He was obsessed with the idea of a partnership. "Amelia, tell Ethan I need him for the next phase of integration. This is where the real complexity begins, sifting through the assets and maximizing the return," Julian instructed her one morning. "We need a long-term contract. I want to make him an official retained strategist for Vance Corp." Amelia knew this was the ultimate trap. A long-term contract meant she had to sustain the lie indefinitely, inventing years of strategic reports and maintaining the coded communication system. She had to create a crisis, a reason for Ethan to retreat completely. That evening, Amelia drafted a highly sensitive encrypted message to Julian. "Amelia, 8:15 p.m. Urgent. Mr. Vance, I've just received a critical update from Ethan. His Liechtenstein trust has been flagged for a secondary audit by an international consortium. It's a fishing expedition, but it requires his complete and immediate focus." Vance, 8:18 p.m. An audit? By whom? Amelia, 8:20 p.m. He cannot disclose the details, sir. It's highly political and involves entities that would compromise Vance Corp if revealed. He must go completely dark. All communications must cease immediately. He is initiating a full operational retreat to protect his anonymity and, by extension, Vance Corp's integrity. Julian's response was swift and angry. Vance, 8:25 p.m. Unacceptable. He cannot abandon the integration. The deal is done, but the work is just beginning. Amelia, 8:30 p.m. Sir, Ethan's commitment to anonymity is absolute. He says, no amount of money is worth the loss of operational freedom. He apologizes for the inconvenience, but his personal security is paramount. He insists I take the reins on the integration, using the full strategy he has already outlined. Amelia had successfully put Ethan into deep freeze. He was now officially gone dark, but not before delegating all future work to Amelia. Julian called her into his office immediately, demanding a face-to-face briefing. This is typical of these independent operators, Julian fumed, pacing his office. They take the money and run the moment things get complicated. I should have known. Amelia remained calm, playing the role of the loyal, slightly pained partner. Sir, he is not running. He is protecting the asset, his freedom. He trusts me to execute the remaining strategy, which is fully mapped out in this binder. Amelia placed a massive, detailed plan on his desk, a plan she had spent the entire night writing. Julian slammed his hand down on the binder. I don't want the plan, Amelia. I want the mind. I want the ongoing, dynamic analysis only he can provide. He stopped pacing and looked at her, his expression softening slightly. I need him, Amelia. I need that level of strategic thinking. You are my only connection. Can you not convince him to maintain contact, even if it's just a single, daily coded message? Amelia shook her head sadly. I am sorry, Mr. Vance. When Ethan goes dark, he goes completely dark, for months, sometimes longer. He will resurface when the threat is neutralized. Until then, you have me. I have been fully briefed on his long-term integration strategy. I will be his voice and his executor until he returns. Julian stared at her for a long time, his frustration warring with his strategic assessment. He knew the integration plan Amelia presented was brilliant because she had written it. Finally, he conceded defeat regarding Ethan. Fine, Julian said, running a hand through his hair. Ethan Miller is gone, but his work continues through you, Amelia. You are now solely responsible for the success of this integration. You will report to me every morning at 7 a.m. personally to review the progress. I will be tracking your performance as if you were Miller himself. Amelia had won. She had neutralized the threat of having to produce Ethan Miller. She was now operating at the highest level of the company, with Julian Vance's complete trust. But the victory felt hollow. Julian Vance was still obsessed, still demanding her time, still intensely focused on her, but only because she was the echo of the man he couldn't have. He wouldn't leave her alone. And the morning meetings. Every day, she would be alone with the CEO in his private office, tasked with performing as the genius strategist he admired, all while knowing she was falling deeper and deeper into a lie that had become her entire career. The lie had not ended. It had simply moved from the realm of corporate strategy to the realm of intense, daily, personal interaction with the CEO. And Amelia, the analyst, was trapped in the persona of Ethan Miller, the ghost. The story was far from over. The 7 a.m. meetings were the crucible. Every morning, Amelia would step into Julian Vance's breathtaking, silent office, the city lights just beginning to sharpen against the rising sun, and she would put on the mask of Ethan Miller. Julian, always impeccably dressed, would skip the pleasantries. He was focused, energized by the integration process. He wasn't just managing the company. He was managing a strategy he believed was designed by a rival genius, and he was determined to prove he could keep pace. Amelia, fueled by adrenaline and the absolute terror of exposure, had to be perfect. She was operating at 150% capacity, running the integration of $1 billion company single-handedly, while simultaneously generating complex, ruthless memos from her handler in Liechtenstein. Julian often tested her. He didn't just accept the directives, he questioned the philosophy behind them. "Amelia," he said one Tuesday morning, leaning over a massive projection screen detailing the planned staff attrition at Summit Logistics. "Ethan has mandated a 40% reduction in middle management within the first 60 days. That's aggressive, even for us. It invites serious union trouble and PR backlash. Why this specific number? Why 40%? Amelia took a breath, channeling the cold logic of her invented persona. "It's a strategic decision, sir. Ethan believes that leaving too much middle management intact allows the old culture to linger and sabotage the integration. The 40% figure is the calculated threshold for cultural collapse. It creates a vacuum that Vance Corp can fill instantly with loyalists. The PR risk is worth the speed of cultural assimilation." Julian nodded slowly, his eyes fixed on the screen, but his attention clearly on her. Cultural collapse, a harsh term, but effective. "You articulate his methods flawlessly, Amelia. You truly are indispensable to him." The compliment stung. She wasn't indispensable, the lie was. The tension between them was becoming unbearable. Julian's focus on Ethan was so intense, so intellectually intimate, that it felt like he was having a relationship with her mind, but through a filter. He respected the ruthless, brilliant strategist, and he respected the loyal, sharp woman who acted as his shield. Amelia was starting to crack under the weight of the double life. She missed Sarah, her confidant, but she couldn't risk leaving the 50th floor for lunch. Julian needed constant access. She was living in Julian Vance's orbit, trapped by the success of her own deception. The breaking point arrived 2 weeks later, during a review of the final asset divestiture plan. Amelia had designed a complex financial maneuver to offload some redundant Summit real estate at an artificially inflated price using a shell corporation. A maneuver that was entirely legal, but certainly pushed the boundaries of corporate ethics. Julian was deeply impressed. "This move," Julian said, tapping the screen where Amelia's complex flowchart glowed, "this is sheer genius. It's the cleanest, fastest way to recoup capital without incurring the tax penalty. Only a man operating outside the standard corporate box would dare attempt this. Truly, Amelia, this is pure Miller." He stood up and walked over to her, his expression a mixture of awe and competitive zeal. "I need to know the origin of this concept, Amelia. I've studied every major M&A strategist of the last 2 decades. I can identify the source of almost every maneuver, but this is unique. Where did Ethan Miller learn to think like this? Did he study military history, game theory? Where does this cold, brilliant audacity come from?" Julian was standing too close, his intensity demanding a truth she couldn't invent quickly enough. He wasn't asking for jargon, he was asking for the foundational philosophy of her invented genius. Amelia's exhaustion, the weeks of non-stop performance, finally overwhelmed her control. She couldn't invent a new backstory about Ethan's military training or his obscure mentor. She had to answer with the truth of the strategy itself. "Sir," Amelia began, her voice tight, "it doesn't come from military strategy. It comes from insolvency law." Julian frowned, confused. Insolvency? Why? Amelia felt the dam break. The words tumbled out, fueled by years of study and professional frustration. "Because in insolvency, you aren't trying to build something. You are trying to dismantle it legally and efficiently, maximizing the return for the creditors while minimizing the liability for the debtors. The goal isn't growth, it's extraction. And the only way to execute this divestiture cleanly, Mr. Vance, is to treat the asset like a distressed company in Chapter 11. You use the shell corporation to mimic a clean sale, but you retain the long-term tax benefit of the distressed asset. It's not audacity. It's a loophole in the corporate restructuring code, and it's the only way to get this done without alerting the SEC. She stopped, breathing heavily. She had defended the strategy not as Ethan Miller's ghost, but as Amelia Hayes, the analyst who had studied for her MBA late into the night. The silence in the office was deafening. Julian Vance stared at her, not with anger, but with an utterly stunned realization dawning in his blue eyes. He didn't look at the projection screen. He looked at Amelia. "Chapter 11, Julian repeated slowly. "You're right. That's exactly the framework. That's your area of expertise, isn't it, Amelia? Corporate restructuring and insolvency." Amelia braced herself. The game was over. She was about to be fired for gross deception. "Yes, sir," she whispered, her shoulders slumping in defeat. "It is." Julian walked back to his desk, picked up a silver pen, and slowly put it down. He didn't look angry. He looked calculating. Ethan Miller, Julian mused, leaning back in his chair. The genius strategist who operates outside the system, who uses a self-funded trust in Liechtenstein, who communicates only through coded messages, and who happens to have the exact specialized knowledge of a senior analyst at Vance Corp. He looked at her, a slow, predatory smile spreading across his face. "You invented him, didn't you, Amelia?" Amelia didn't try to deny it. There was no point. "Yes, Mr. Vance, I did. I apologize. It started as a defense mechanism to deter unwanted advances, and then it grew. I never intended for it to reach this level." She swallowed hard. "I understand if you need to terminate my employment immediately, sir. I'll pack my things." Julian held up a hand, stopping her. "Terminate your employment? Why would I do that, Amelia?" "Because I lied," she stated plainly. "I lied to the CEO about a billion-dollar consultant." Julian Vance steepled his fingers, his gaze unblinking. "You didn't lie, Amelia. You demonstrated the single most impressive piece of strategic foresight and operational discipline I have ever witnessed in this firm. You created a fictional persona so compelling, so brilliant, that you convinced the CEO of Vance Corp to commit hundreds of millions of dollars based on his strategies." He leaned forward. "You didn't lie about your capabilities, Amelia. You lied about the name attached to them. You gave yourself a protective shield, a male name, because you knew the corporate world would respect a ruthless shark named Ethan Miller more than a pushy analyst named Amelia Hayes." Amelia felt a wave of shame and validation wash over her. "I needed the shield, sir," she admitted, her voice trembling slightly. "I needed to be taken seriously, and I was tired of fielding unprofessional advances. Ethan gave me the authority I couldn't get on my own." Julian nodded, his expression serious now, tinged with respect. "I get it. And it worked. You successfully deterred unwanted attention, secured the promotion you deserved, and delivered a successful hostile takeover. You played the game perfectly, Amelia. You didn't just understand the market. You understood the corporate ecosystem and exploited its weaknesses." He paused, a tiny flicker of amusement in his eyes. "And frankly, the concept of a self-funded trust in Liechtenstein was a touch of genius, very difficult to track." Amelia managed a weak smile. It sounded discreet. "It was perfect," Julian confirmed. "So let's be clear. Ethan Miller is officially retired. He has taken his 10% commission, which by the way is legally yours, and vanished into the shadows of international finance, never to be heard from again." He looked at the binder on his desk. The integration strategy, however, still needs to be executed, and that strategy was written by Amelia Hayes. Julian stood up again, walking around the desk toward her. He didn't stop at the edge of the desk this time. He stood right in front of her, closing the professional distance that had been maintained for months. Amelia Hayes, you are, effective immediately, the head of strategic integration for the Summit Logistics portfolio, reporting directly to me. Your performance, your ruthlessness, and your strategic genius have been proven beyond any doubt. You don't need a pseudonym to command respect here anymore. He looked down at her, his gaze intense. I was obsessed with Ethan Miller because he was the only person who seemed capable of challenging me intellectually. I realize now that person has been sitting across from me the entire time. Amelia felt a flush of heat rise to her cheeks. She had the job, the authority, and the respect she craved. The lie had worked, and the truth had been accepted as an act of professional brilliance, not deception. Thank you, Mr. Vance, she said, finally feeling the relief she had been chasing for months. Julian leaned in slightly, his voice dropping even lower. But there is one final thing, Amelia. One last piece of corporate feedback. Yes, sir? The reason you created Ethan was to put up a wall, to get people to leave you alone, professionally and personally. And I respected that wall. I respected Ethan's territorial claims so fiercely that I channeled all my focus into professional engagement with his Proxy. He paused, a subtle shift in his demeanor that was far removed from the CEO persona. Now, the Proxy is gone. The wall is down. And I know precisely who the formidable, brilliant, and ruthlessly strategic person in this room is. He offered her a small, knowing smile, the kind of smile that promised a completely new, complicated dynamic. So, Amelia, Julian Vance concluded, his eyes holding hers, now that you've secured your career and successfully gotten rid of your fictitious boyfriend, what are you going to do to get me to leave you alone? Amelia didn't flinch this time. She had fought for her place, and she had won. She knew how to handle Julian Vance now, not as a subordinate, but as an intellectual equal. She met his gaze, returning the confidence he had just bestowed upon her. Mr. Vance, she replied, her voice steady and clear, I suggest we start with that 7 a.m. meeting. We have $1 billion company to integrate, and I have a strategy that I believe is superior to Ethan Miller's final draft. Let me show you. Julian laughed then, a genuine, delighted sound that echoed slightly in the massive office. It was the sound of a CEO who had finally found the partner he'd been searching for. Show me, Amelia, he challenged, stepping back slightly, but leaving the personal tension hanging palpably in the air. I'm ready to listen. Amelia Hayes walked back to her desk, no longer the terrified assistant, no longer the proxy for a ghost. She had invented a man to secure her professional space, and in the end, that man had cleared the way for her true self. She knew the relationship with Julian Vance would be intense, complex, and potentially dangerous. But it would be on her terms. The game was still on. But now, Amelia Hayes was playing for herself, and she was already winning. The CEO might not leave her alone, but now, she wouldn't have it any other way. She was exactly where she was meant to be, at the top.